Thank you for selecting my SQL Server 2014 Express playlist. The point of this video series is speed, brevity, and clarity. The goal is, in under 10 minutes, you have the outline to complete the lesson. Each video will have a corresponding blog post. You can find the link to my blog in the video's description below. Where appropriate, I will redirect you to my GitHub account to download files and save you time. This video series is about table creation and population and importing and all that. So we're going to run through it real quick. So remember the analogy we talked about? We have a file drawer has files within it. Files within it are like tables. Each table in the database like a file in a file drawer. So what we're going to do is we're going to create some of those files or tables. We're going to use the SQL Server Management Studio user interface. Then I'll show you how to do it creating tables with a diagram. And then I'll show you how to create the tables with Transact SQL. So let's get started. The first one up is going to be creating a table using the SQL Server Management Studio interface. And you can do that just by right mouse button click on tables and pick table. When you do that, this interface is going to appear where you give each column, or which is like an attribute about something. So for the first one, why don't we create an address table? The purpose of the address table is to hold snail mail addresses. So one of the first things you always want to get in the habit of doing whenever possible is adding a primary key. And the primary key, a great naming convention, is the name of the table and ID. And tables should be not plural but singular. So address ID. And we're going to make this an integer. An integer is a whole number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that kind of thing. So make it in it. And your primary key doesn't allow nulls. So we'll click that checkbox off. A null represents nothing, empty. It basically says there's nothing here, which is different than a space, but that's another story. So I want to make that my primary key. I'm going to select that role. And right here, you'll see it says set primary key when you mouse over the little key on the second toolbar. So I'm going to click that. When I do, a little key shows up here. That's perfect. But we're not done yet. We still got more work to do. What we need to do is go down to here where it says identity specification. And we want to change that identity specification, or is identity, to yes. What that tells us is that it's going to handle the adding of the identities all by itself. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So each one is unique, just like your address for your home is unique compared to other homes. So if we want to have an address ID though, that's pretty much for the system. That isn't for us. So the next thing we want to do is give it enough information to put our real address in. And mine is going to be an nvarchar. The N means multi-byte or international. You can think of it that way. So, and 200 characters. And I'm going to say not null for this as well, because you always have to fill out the first line of the address. You can't insert address rows into a table for nothing. So I'll make the second one the same size. The 200 is 200 characters. And that one can be null. And I'll add a city. And we'll make the city nvarchar 50. And that can be null. What do you think? Yeah. And state ID. So hopefully one of the things you're noticing is state ID, you had an ID for the address. Are you going to have a state table? And the answer is yes. So we're going to wire that up. And then we're going to do a zip code. And our zip code, we'll make that a varchar, because it's pretty much numbers and a minus sign, or a few letters if it's Canadian. There we go. So now we've made a table. We haven't given it a name though yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to save it. And when we save it, I want to give it the name address. Okay. So if I refresh this guy, there's address. DBO stands for DB owner. So let's take a look at this. These are these columns that we were talking about. Well, let's make this a little bigger. Hang on. And there's the key for the primary key. And address 1, address 2, city, state, zip. And state is an integer. And the other ones hold characters. Now when you open up the keys, right now it's got a PK underscore address, which stands for primary key. No triggers. What about index? Oh look, there's an index. It's a clustered index. What does that mean? Your clustered index is the way that the data is stored underneath the table, and a clustered index is traditionally the primary key, but it doesn't have to be. But that's beyond the scope of these videos, is optimizing your keys and your primary keys to choose an index, which is your clustered index, versus any secondary indices. So that's our first table when we just created it. Kind of cool. All right, so I'm going to go a little quicker, and we're going to blast out a person and a person address. So let's knock that out. Why are we doing this? Well, we have people and we have addresses, and multiple people can live at the same address, or a single person can own multiple addresses. That's why we're setting it up. So primary key, once again, click on the key. That sets our primary key. We like identities, so we go here. There are times when you won't want to use an identity for a primary key, but they're kind of rare. An example is when you want to create secondary tables before you create the primary table. So if we're going to be a person, I'm going to be a person. No, I'm kidding. Going to make my first name nvarchar. I'm going to make my last name. Probably should make an uppercase N. There we go. Got to fill out the first and last name in this database. We'll want a prefix and a suffix. And that's going to allow nulls. And suffix will allow nulls. And for fun, we're going to include birth date. So traditionally, the date time is the data type that existed before. We're going to just try date this time. There's probably a joke in there. All right, so we're good. So we're ready to make person. That's another thing. See how it's a singular? We're not people or persons. It's person. That's always a good thing to do. So we'll refresh this table, and you'll see both address and person. Very cool. So what's the next step? Well, the next step is to join them together. Okay. And one way to do it is to create what's called a person address table. So it's going to have an integer as well, just like the other one. And then it's going to have a person ID. And it's going to have an address ID. And we'll save this table. And we're going to call it person address. Sometimes people put an underscore in between the tables to differentiate them, but they don't use underscores later on. That can get interesting. So we're not going to do that. And if we refresh this guy, look at that. So what we don't have with these guys is referential integrity. So I'm going to show you that next. Okay, so what have we done? We've created an address, we created a person, we created a person address. So let's take a look at something called the diagrammer. The diagrammer, it's our database diagram, is really cool. Now for whatever reason, databases did not come with the database diagramming a long time ago, and they still ask us to create it. So we'll say yes. New database diagram. Now I'm going to add all of my tables. And here they are. Now, I like what they did. See how you have person, person address, and address? That's perfect. So what I'm going to do to create the referential integrity is click on person's primary key and bring it to the person ID in the person address table. And it's going to create a foreign key, person address to person. So person to person. It's good. Say OK. Now, check existing data on creation or re-enabling. There's no data in there yet, so that's not a problem. This just defines the same tables that we talked about. Enforce for replication. We're not covering replication. Insert and update specification, delete role, and update role. Typically, I leave these alone, and most people I know do. But they can do some really amazing things, especially with Cascade. If you set the delete rule to Cascade, when you delete the person, it will go through and blow away any rows that are in person address that correspond to it. Cascade's very powerful. I've never found really a place for set default. Set null has some value as well. You have to have a philosophy in your software about whether or not you want to delete all the child rows first and then delete the parent, or delete the parent and have it ghost all the children. I really do recommend against Cascade, other than in some specific instances where you have a lot of tables and they're ancillary tables without, for lack of a better term, think of it as a parent and children with no grandchildren. Once you start getting in the grandchildren, that Cascade is very deadly. So no action is preferred because it'll stop you from deleting it. So I recommend it. All right, so now we're going to do address. Helps if you click on the key, take it to the address ID, it pops up, they all match up. Say OK, say OK. So that created the referential integrity, a very easy way between them. Another thing you can do is create tables. So remember the state ID? We wanted to have a state with the state ID. So we should go ahead and build that. Let's take a look. So how we do that is right mouse button, click the background and pick new table. Add table would add an existing table. And we're going to call that table state. I know that was a shock. So can you imagine what the first one's going to be? No, I bet you can't. Yes, you can. State ID. It's going to be an integer. It's not going to allow nulls. Click on it. And we should be able to set the primary key. Now the next thing we want is we want the state code. And the state code is going to be char2. Why char? Because there's 2 characters and you always have them. And we're not going to have any nulls for that. And then we're going to have a state name. And we'll make the nvarchar out of habit 50. It's kind of big. And that's not going to allow nulls either. There we go. All right. So we got this guy made. And then what we're going to do is take the state ID and drag it over to the state ID. FK address state, state ID to state ID, say OK, and we're good to go. So now magically, we're going to save it. And when we save it, it's going to write everything out. Now one trick here before we save this is what we could do is turn on Profiler, and Profiler would record everything that we're doing. And that's a good way to figure out the SQL when you don't know it. So let's go ahead and save that. And we're going to call this diagram something complex and unusual like main diagram. The sarcasm's free, just to point that out. And what's it say? The following tables will be saved to your database. Do you want to continue? Yeah, that's why I did it. Off we go. Cool. Now, you can change the view of what you see. So we could just change it to column names, and it looks the same. And we'll save this guy. Now they're all the same, and we're good to go. Pretty cool, huh? I think it's cool. So now the last thing to show you is how could you create tables automatically using T-SQL? Well, that's pretty easy, and Microsoft makes it incredibly easy. Right mouse button click, go down to Script Table as Create to New Query Editor window. Wait a little bit. They create the structure for you. Now you could type all this and save it, and it would do the same thing. But what I'm going to do is explain what we're seeing here. So create table makes the table. That's called DDL for data definition language. And it's going to make a DBO address. The address is what we picked. The DBO is the database owner. Here's the first column, address ID. It's an integer, which means its whole numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. Cover that. It's an identity. It starts at 1 and it increments by 1. So you could have it start at 10 and increment by 10, and it would be 10, 20, 30, 40. And that's not null. Address 1 is the first line of your address. Address 2 is the second line of your address. City, self-explanatory. State ID, which is going to correspond to our states table. And our zip code, which is varchar10. Alright, and it has a constraint where it's the primary key and it's going to be clustered, which means the internal structure of the rows that come in are ordered in this order. So number 1 is the first, number 2 is the second, number 3 is the third. Long time ago there used to be a technology called Btrieve, and Btrieve would actually set up parent-child relationships where each parent had n children, and you could traverse the nodes. If this doesn't make any sense to you, don't worry, it doesn't need to. This is just extra polish for those people that might have a background and they can remember it. So anyway, get back and focused. So this primary key is clustered, and it's basically the address ID, and the order that it's stored is ascending order. So, and then here we're altering the table address that we just created, and we're adding a constraint, a foreign key constraint, which makes sure that any number that is in your state ID corresponds to a number that should be in the state ID from the primary table. Next up, we're going to move on to table population.